It was early this morning. I landed at 1:05 a.m. It was a bit of a motley crew on the flight coming into Providence. Made my way over to the hotel. I got, you can walk, like you just come out like the garage. You've probably never stayed there, but if you ever do have to stay there, it's a very lovely hotel if you have to fly out of Providence early one morning. Walked in, the guy said, "Where are you coming from?" I said, "Louisiana." He said, "Why?" I said, "That is not a great endorsement of your state," which all I know about is you're one of the colonies, right? Like that's what I know about this area. You have great accents. You claim to have good seafood, but my Louisiana-ness is going to pop in and say, you have northern seafood. We have the Gulf seafood. Everybody just started hating me because of that. Go Pats? Like, can I say that? That'll make everybody happy again? Yeah. My podcast editor for Our Sunday Visitor actually lives in Rhode Island. I completely forgot. So he and I are going to go grab coffee later, and he said, or we can go get some seafood. And I kind of bristled because there's like, I don't know. I've got an affinity for our shrimp that bottom feeds and gets churned up by hurricanes. Like the crab up here, I don't know what I would do with. Is it crab? What is the thing up here? Clams, right? Are y'all clams? What, oh, that's right, lobster, right? Not lobster, lobster. And you put butter on it? This friend of mine, so we were at a seafood restaurant together once upon a time in South Carolina, which they can hold their own. I think it's us and then you guys and then maybe them. Don't tell them I said that. But we're sitting there and we're talking about crawfish versus lobster. Crawfish are, of course, like little. You all think they're bugs. We think they're a delicacy. We'll boil them and then you do unspeakable things to them. There's a bishop in the room, so I'm not going to describe the way you pull them apart to eat them. And so my friend Justin, he goes, "Well, do you put butter on it?" And I said, "What would I do with butter?" And that has now become like this common joke between the two of us. Why would I put butter on it? Forgot all of that because I got in so early this morning. The Lord multiplied my sleep. It was a quick, lovely drive. Avis gave me a BMW, which is exactly what you want to drive when you're pulling up to a conference with a bunch of people who serve the church. I promise it is not mine, and it's like a spaceship. It was either that or a Tesla, and a Tesla is like a spaceship, and I had no idea where I would plug it in. And don't they explode? So I just said, give me a car with gas, and we'll be fine. And then I had to Google, is Massachusetts the state where you can't put gas in your own car? And remembered that's New Jersey. And I was really grateful I wasn't there. So with all of that, I'm so happy to be here. I'll be honest with you. I had no idea who was going to be in the room today. I have been in kind of a chaotic and crazy few months. My sister just entered the convent. She entered the Sisters of Life, but then she's back home for a few weeks because she's finishing her doctoral dissertation in canon law. She's the smart one in the family. I'm the funny one. She's the smart one. So it's been like kind of a whirlwind of like saying goodbye and then welcoming her home. I work in daily radio, so for 9 hours a week, I'm hanging out on Sirius XM 129 in between Joel Osteen and EWTN. You can find us for a few hours every day. We call ourselves Catholic Talk for Saints and Sinners. I don't know what sinners I'm specifically speaking to, but I am a sinner, so it's nice to get to hang out there. So it's been kind of just a chaotic, busy. Our kids just started school back in August. My husband just finished his master's degree. And he's now serving as an assistant principal at a charter school in town. So we've kind of been in survival mode. I would not describe the McGrady home as thriving right now. I will just say that like we are getting by, making sure that there's a clean uniform for each child every day, and there's gas in the tank of the car, and yeah, we'll figure out something to eat for dinner. And so with like this chaos, I remembered I was coming to Massachusetts and that I was flying into Rhode Island and then I was going to have to drive, but I legitimately, until this week, I thought I was talking to a bunch of youth ministers, which some people in the room might be, right? Some of you might be youth ministers. Okay, all right, so let's pivot there. So, and then when I texted Oscar and I texted David just to kind of get an idea of who was going to be in the room. And then last night, I'm sitting in the Admiral's Club at Charlotte's airport. Our flight kept getting delayed because our crew was coming from Philly, and they had gotten delayed. It was just kind of everything gets backed up, and this mass of humanity is standing in the B terminal, and like all the gates are so crammed together as if 200 people aren't about to get on a plane. Like, yeah, we can fit 30 people comfortably right here, even though 200 are going to shove in. And Rhode Islanders are not super pleasant at 10:30 at night when their flights have been delayed. So I'm just kind of standing there, and I have this tendency of asking the Lord to show me why. This is a good habit to get into. Why? Why is this flight delayed? Why is my life so busy and crazy right now that I can't see up from down? Why did I get handed keys to a BMW a few hours ago? Right? Why? What are you trying to show me? Because I feel like when you ask the Lord why, the Lord's then able to say, like very clearly, he goes, watch this. Why? Watch this. So I'm standing there and I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting, and people are starting to kind of push forward even though there's no pilot yet. So there's nowhere for us to go, but it says we're about to start boarding, right? So we're just waiting, and this older gentleman in a Vietnam veteran hat, and you don't see a whole lot of those very often these days, was standing there, and he was pushing his own wheelchair. And like, he was capable, he was perfectly fine, he had his bags in the chair, and it was just so that he could go get in line for pre-boarding. Even though we don't have a pilot yet, he probably didn't realize we were waiting on the crew, because when they were making the announcements, you couldn't quite hear it. So this older guy with this Vietnam veteran hat, my grandfather's a veteran, so I have a soft spot when I see these guys, especially in airports, especially if they're traveling alone. Every like granddaughter instinct kind of kicks in. And as he goes to push himself forward, I was going to be like the good American coming to one of the 13 colonies. I was going to walk up to that guy and say, thank you for your service. You know, I was going to ask him if he needed any help. I was pretty proud of myself. And as I like take a step forward, this lady cuts me off. And she's kind of standing there, and I can tell that she's annoyed, and she is dropping every R in the book, and like she's getting angrier and angrier as she's talking to the people around her because she's really tired and she wants to get where she's going. And so I can't really like get to him without going around this lady, and then this other guy comes around me and he walks up to him and he just puts his hand on his shoulder and he shakes his hand, and they had this authentic moment of encounter that I wanted. Like, I wanted to go have that moment. But I got cut off by the angry Rhode Islander, and so now he's getting to have that moment. And part of me kind of bristled, like, no, that was mine. That was my moment to thank him for his service, and it was taken from me. But then I see the older guy, like, laugh, like, guffaw. And then the guy that has come to speak to him, like, give him a hug and kind of stand there for a few extra minutes. And they stood there talking for about 10 more minutes until the pilot finally got there and we started boarding the flight. And getting to see that moment of encounter, that was why. Because none of us would have been shoving forward that quickly had we not been delayed. The veteran probably wouldn't have pushed his chair the way that he did, except that he wanted to get to the front of the line because of this throngs of people. And here was this other guy who sees him and goes and says something kind to him, and then they connect. That moment of connection was worth witnessing at 10:45 at B11 in the Charlotte airport, the armpit of America, as far as I'm concerned. Waiting to get to an airport where, I kid you not, 1:05 in the morning, coming down the escalator, a guy was playing Edelweiss in the bag claim area of PVD. Is that a normal thing? I thought I was drunk for a second, but I don't drink. Then I was like, this must be a fever dream. This cannot be real. I'm going to wake up in my house and realize everything got canceled, and, you know, like, or I'm in heaven. This is heaven, and it's a weird version of heaven. No, it must be purgatory. I still don't know why the guy was playing Edelweiss at 1 o'clock in the morning. I filmed it just so I had like evidence when I woke up 6 hours later to make sure I wasn't entirely crazy. So maybe that was why everything was delayed. But these moments of encounter, that's what evangelization is about. And whether you're working with youth, though it doesn't seem like any of you are, maybe you should, or whether you're leading a Bible study, or you're running RCIA, or you're part of the bereavement ministry, or you go to Mass on Sunday and want to do more, our privilege, and I'm using that word on purpose, that word gets refashioned in a lot of different ways in our culture these days and is almost kind of used as a criticism, but I think it's a gift. We are privileged to have the opportunities to both witness encounters, authentic encounters, and we have the great responsibility and obligation to facilitate these encounters. That at the end of the day, sharing the gospel is not so much just knowing a lot, is not about gigantic numbers in attendance, although that would be helpful at times. That sharing the gospel is about encountering human beings, seeing them for all that they are, 10:45 at the terminal, waiting to get on a delayed flight, or Sunday morning when they're coming into Mass, with 2 kids that are gonna raise hell, and they're nervous and terrified that every lady of a certain age is gonna shoot a death glare at them. It's these moments of encounter that we are privileged to both participate in and to see. And to change our thinking from, what do you need from me, Lord? What do you want from me, Lord? What do I have to do, Lord? To why am I in this moment right now? What do you have to give to me? That's a mindset that I think a lot of people who would show up at a lovely parish hall on a Saturday morning need to actually adopt. Because you're the doers. Like, in some sense, any practical advice that we talk about today when it comes to how to actually evangelize, use this program, use this opening question, hone your testimony, your 2-3 minute testimony, all of those practical things that we're going to get into as the day goes on. To some extent, you know that stuff. Otherwise, you wouldn't have driven here for a 9 a.m. mass and some okay coffee and listen to somebody who's probably talking too fast. Like, you wouldn't have done that if you didn't know some of the practicals already. What I do think a lot of us have to do is shift our thinking from, I am a doer who takes care of a lot of the stuff that has to happen in my parish, in my community, to I am, first and foremost, a beloved child of God who is given the opportunity to do these other things. That the doing is not the first part of my existence. I don't know when we started as a society, probably after the Industrial Revolution. And I'm not just being nerdy when I say that. There was like a shift in the way our society existed when we were able to actually create these factories. We were able to do things in an efficient manner, and more was better. And there becomes this idea in our mind that my productivity, my output, what I'm able to point to and say, I did that, that's where my value and my worth comes from. At the end of your 40-hour work week, what have you accomplished? This is why there's such a great divide between millennials and boomers right now, and I say that affectionately. My dad works with a bunch of millennials at a bank. He's 2 years from retirement. He's the guy slacking off. He's got senioritis because he's close to it, but he still looks and he's like, those millennials don't want to work. And I'm like, well, maybe there was like a shift in our mindset where like our whole lives are not work, but maybe we're made for more than just coming and punching a time clock. And there's this constant tension because he doesn't think they're being productive enough. And they don't think he's living life to the full enough. It's like the guy goes kayaking 3 days a week. He's fine. He's doing okay with living life to the full. There's this understanding that I am only good if I have done fill in the blank. And we experience this in our homes, we experience this with our families, we certainly experience it in parish ministry, where we look for the output, we look for the product, we look for the productivity, and then we look for the praise that very rarely comes in church life. We have to shift our mindset from, I'm not just what I do, but first and foremost, my evangelizing other people, these opportunities for encounter with other people can only flow forth from not just a place of productivity, but from a place of being loved. And I can be practical when I say that. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, which we're all reading with Father Mike Schmitz, 851, I don't know if he's gotten there. I'm still on day 2. I'm like way behind. But in the 850s, we taught, don't tell him that. Oscar and I are friends with him. Please don't tell him that. We talk about the missionary mandate of the church, this idea that the church is literally on earth to go and convert and to share and to preach and to evangelize. But then there's this little line tucked in, because this is what the catechism is really good for. These little lines that you can sit with for days, and you realize, I've thought about this all wrong, but thank God for Catechism of the Catholic Church, point 851, sentence 2. We're really weird in the church that we can reference these things, right? It is from God's love for all men that the church in every age receives both the obligation and the vigor of her missionary dynamism. Whoever wrote that, probably Benedict XVI, should be a doctor of the church, right? Because where does our vigor, where does our obligation to evangelize actually come from? Does it come from your theology degree, which I'm proud you got? Does it come from listening to all those podcasts, which you should definitely listen to my 2 and the one that's available exclusively on Hallow? Does it come from attending every Bible study and purchasing every book that Ignatius Press puts on discount and coming to the days on Saturday morning? No. Those things are all good, and I'm glad they exist. But it is from God's love. And we've gotten away from that in the church. I don't think we've gotten away from it because of any one particular thing. I think we've gotten away from it because of a collective drifting away from an understanding of God's absolute, unfathomable, abundant, life-giving love of us. Like, who in here has kids? Who's got kids? Okay, who's got grandkids? The grandparents in the room. Something happens when you get a grandkid, right? Like, you love your kids, but sometimes you want to punt your kids across the room. But then there's these grandkids, right? And I don't obviously have grandchildren. I have a 6 and a 3-year-old too, who are driving me lovingly and joyfully crazy. I'll show you all a picture of them later. But there's this thing. My mom was always a tough lady. She's a hardworking lady. She's a CPA. She's got a very analytical mind. She's owned her own business longer than I've been alive. I've seen my mom cry like 2 times. We're very close, and she's very tender-hearted, but my mom was always like the stern one. My dad, he was my buddy. And then my kids were born, and this like softening occurred inside the heart of my mom, who's now Graham, or Gammy, if the 3-year-old has her way. To where like now she's hiding under blankets because my 3-year-old hides from the Google, because she's a child of millennials. We have a Google in every room, so she hides from the Google. She might know something that we don't know. And my mom's right there under a blanket. Or my 6-year-old says, Graham, come over and let's watch The Little Mermaid. And so my mom just sits on the couch. I've never seen my mom sit still for longer than an hour in my entire life. Sat still for 2.5 hours of that movie. And was like riveted, like told Rose, let's go pick out some outfits tomorrow that match the clothing. I was like, I had to fight to go get the Beyonce CD when I was in high school. And now you're going to Target and spending $80 on costumes for a 6-year-old for a movie that was like, okay. There was this softening, there was this immediate, this tiny human came from my tiny human. And there was just this affection. And watching my mom be grandparent to my children has kind of reminded me of the capacity that we have for love. The capacity we have to care, the capacity we have to be generous, that a lot of times we limit. We might unfathomably pour it out upon our children on certain days when they're behaving, or upon our grandchildren because we can't help. That's literally what we're supposed to do as grandparents. But we limit our understanding of love because we've only ever maybe experienced the human version of it and have not allowed ourselves to rest in God's love, which is patient and kind and generous and good and all those things that we can rattle off at every Catholic wedding, but that we don't rest in, that we are able, obligated and vigorously able to step out as missionaries, as evangelizers because of love. The logical conclusion would be then that the first responsibility of the person who wants to evangelize is that you actually have to spend time being loved by God. That the best thing that we can do as people who want to serve the church, and you showed up on a Saturday at 9 o'clock in the morning, so you want to serve the church. The best thing that you could do is just sit and rest in the love of God. How we do that, we'll talk about. But to understand that the first priority of my life is not what I do and what I produce and how many Bible studies I plan and how many people come to the gala and how many folks we get in the RCIA program. All of that is good and well, and I want to hear about that later. But the first primary thing I must do is be a person who can confidently say, God loves me. Not theoretically, not conceptually, not from afar. God loves me. Sees me as his beloved child, as his son, as his daughter. And love gives, love cares, love is present. That God actually wants to be bothered by me. That the Lord wants to know what's on my mind. That when I don't have the words to share the faith, he will give them to me if I ask. If I feel alone and isolated within my parish, which got merged with another parish, which got merged with another parish, then God loves me in that hurt. That God desires to know the joys and the sorrows. and that wants to be close to me even when I feel like I have a gazillion and one things to do and I'm not thriving. A couple of years ago, I feel like my husband and I have this line where we're like, oh, things will slow down in a couple weeks, and then they just never do. And I think we'll be saying that until we die. But we were at a phase of life, it was post-COVID, and like COVID had shut everything down. I was traveling hundreds of thousands of miles. In 2019, I took 6 international trips, including 3 trips to England and 1 to Australia. So I like really logged my miles, and I'm still riding on that platinum status, executive platinum status, because I just keep re-upping it, because I guess we're not still back from COVID, I don't know. But we kind of hit rock bottom during COVID when we realized we didn't know how to be married if I wasn't traveling, because I was always coming and going, and so we had to recalibrate a lot of things. And so I got a new spiritual director during this time, and my husband got a new spiritual director, and so we're both going to spiritual direction, we're both going to counseling, we're really trying to figure out how we can thrive within our spiritual lives, so that we can thrive as parents, we can thrive as people who work. And my spiritual director is a Dominican, and those Dominicans, man, they're tough. I love them. I'm just really relieved my sister didn't become one of them, because golly, like they know how to hand it to you. And so I'm in a spiritual direction session with this Dominican, and I'm kind of telling him like all of the chaos that's been happening, and travel was kind of starting to come back, and I was trying to make some decisions about how much I was going to add to my calendar, and I was explaining to him that I felt like I had too much in my head. Do you ever have this feeling? Where like, I know my children's social security numbers, and I'm glad that I do, but also that's taking up valuable brain space. And I feel like there's got to be a program that's secure enough on my phone to hold that information, but like as a mom, I just feel like so much of my brain. And then as somebody who like serves in the church, at the time I was volunteering with their RCIA program, because surprise, the professional evangelists also still volunteer because it keeps you grounded, right? And this RCIA program, and I've been asked to give a series of talks on the Eucharist. I like had no idea what I was going to say. Because Eucharist is great, but kind of hard to talk about. Just get ready for that Congress next year, because the rest of us, we're all stressed about it, because we don't know how to talk about this, because it's beautiful and powerful, but hard. And I just had all this stuff, and Rose was growing, and Claire was growing, and life was just crazy. And my spiritual director just looked at me and he said, I'm going to give you homework. And I love homework. I'm a very type A person. I was that annoying kid that would raise my hand in the back and say, do we have an extra worksheet to do to practice? Everybody hated me. Ironically enough, now I hate homework with my kids, but, you know, life is a flat circle. But he said, I'm going to give you homework, but this is going to be a different type of homework. I was like, okay, this could be exciting. And he said, I want you to go home and read every day for the next year, Luke chapter 10, 38 to 42. I didn't have my Bible on me at the time. So I was thinking to myself, oh, I hope it's a good one. I hope it's a good one. I get home, I open up my Bible. Luke chapter 10, 38 to 42 is the story of Martha and Mary. And I went, darn it. I hate that one. I hate that one for a lot of reasons. You probably hate it too, because I feel like the way we've talked about Martha and Mary over the years, like we have really given Martha the short stick, right? There was a book a few years ago, my mom actually mailed it to me in college. It was called Having a Mary Heart and a Martha World. Lots of people loved it. I didn't, because I really thought they were unfair to Martha. Jesus is coming over for dinner, and you're going to put out a spread, right? Like if he was coming to Massachusetts, you'd give him lobster, right? Like you would figure it out. And so Jesus gets to this village where this woman named Martha's the key person in the story. She's mentioned first. Martha welcomes him. She has a sister named Mary, lazy, who sat beside the Lord at his feet, listening to him speak. Martha's got out the hummus and the olives and the pita chips. She's made drinks. And Mary's just hanging out. She's the classic second sister, right? Like the big sister's doing all the stuff that needs to be done. And here comes the little sister, like, when do we eat, you know? Every Thanksgiving of my life. And then she went off and became a nun. So like she really does just roll in for the holidays. That's okay. Jesus and I are talking about it. So Martha welcomes Jesus, and Jesus sits down. And he's speaking, right? Like the Lord has come over for dinner. This wasn't a formal keynote. Jesus was not giving his Sermon on the Mount when he's hanging out at his friend's house. They're telling stories. He's probably telling them about that crazy Gerasene demoniac guy who I guarantee Jesus was laughing about the pigs that he made fall off the side of a hill. Like, I would kill to have heard Jesus tell that story at dinner with people, because it had to have been hilarious. He's just hanging out with his friends, and he's being with them. He's spending time with them. what you do with people that you love, whose house you go over to for dinner. Hospitality has been given to him, and he is so grateful for it, I imagine. And so Mary's there hanging out, and Martha, she's doing that passive-aggressive thing that every mother has done. She's banging things around in the kitchen, hoping somebody comes and asks her if she needs some help. She's like turning on the water vigorously, off and on. All the guys are like, that's happening? It's like, yes, we all feel it deeply. I sometimes tell this story at women's conferences, and it makes all the deacons in the room very uncomfortable, but that's okay. We like to have a good time with it. Martha she's getting hot and bothered because she sees what she's doing. She's serving food. She's welcomed people to her home, which means she'd been cleaning up for days, because you know those dirt floors probably drove her nuts. She's made sure that Jesus is taken care of, is feeling like he belongs there after a crazy stretch of travel. And she's completely and totally alone in what she's doing. Otherwise, what is about to happen would not have happened. Martha got to a place of feeling like everything she had done had gone unseen. A feeling like who she was no longer mattered because she was by herself. She felt like she was spinning her wheels, doing all this good stuff that nobody acknowledged, that nobody showed up for, that nobody signed up for, that nobody posted about on Facebook, that Father vetoed the second she walked into his office with the idea. Martha is the classic evangelist in a parish who does, and feels like nobody else is helping out. Oh, they're all just in there sitting with Jesus. And here I am, making sure that everyone's nice and comfortable, and the printouts are done, and the books are ordered, and the kids are registered, and the conference is going to be gone to. And Martha breaks. And thank God she does, because I think this is one of the most powerful moments in all of sacred scripture. Martha, burdened with much serving. And you feel that word, burdened. She feels it. She feels the hurt. She feels the heaviness. She feels the weight of 1,001 things in her brain. I want you to think about the burdens that you carried into this day for a second. The plans that still need to be made, the forms that need to be sent out, the ideas that you have, but you don't exactly know how to implement them just yet, the desire you have to share, but you don't know the practicals of how, the burdens of family challenges or financial issues or problems on the home front, whatever it might be, the burdens, everything that's swirling around in your head that prevents you from seeing Jesus Christ is sitting in your house and he just wants to spend time with you. Because what we try to do so often, and Catholics are really good at this, we try to manage our burdens. We try to organize our burdens. We put them on a calendar and we color code our burdens. We send out emails that nobody reads with our burdens. We have meetings that could have been emails with our burdens, right? Like we do our darndest to put our burdens into boxes that we can carry even though they are far too heavy. Right around when my spiritual director had told me to read this passage, part of why he probably told me to read it every single day was because just a few weeks before, my husband and I had probably one of the top 10 biggest fights of our married life over something so stupid. See, Rose is in Catholic school, and I was discovering that as a Catholic school parent, they send home a lot of paper with extra things that I'm expected to do. I want the version of Catholic school parenting where I drop my kids off in the right uniform and I pick them up. And I don't have to send 15 different cupcakes every week, or I don't have to donate to this or that fundraiser. Like, I'm paying tuition, isn't that what that's for? And I may be being a little jaded by this, even though I was a Catholic school teacher for a while. And they sent home the packet for Catholic Schools Week, which about broke me. Because for some reason, we had all these dress-up days for Catholic Schools Week. And now I had to run to Walmart and find all these different colored t-shirts and like toys that she had to bring for reading day. And Tuesday was inexplicably patriotic day because we're patriotic in our Catholic schools. Like, yay, America. But I don't know that those two things are connected. Like, she has to wear a red shirt with a flag on it, and that'll make us love Catholic school more. I was very confused, and I was very annoyed, and all this paper had come home. And so I managed the burden. And I made a shared iCal on our phone that was going to be color coordinated so that it would notify the both of us of all the things going on during Catholic School Week. And I made Rose's pink, like this pink calendar, and all the things for Catholic Schools Week were going to go in the phone and alert the both of us at 6 a.m. when it was time to get up and get everybody ready for school. And my husband takes first shift. God love the man. He's an early bird. So he gets the kids up in the morning and dress, and then I swoop in at like 6:20 and do hair and brush teeth and get everybody out the door. And so 6:20 on Tuesday, red shirt day, I walk into the kitchen thinking, surely the calendar has alerted us and she's going to be in her red shirt. And she's sitting at the breakfast nook in her uniform, happily eating her Lucky Charms, watching an episode of Bluey. And I turn, and there's my husband standing at the sink looking like Jake from State Farm in a red shirt and khakis. And I walk in, I see Rose, I look over, I see Tommy, which meant that my husband, who is an intelligent man, got a notification on his phone that said red shirt and thought, okay, and went and put on a red shirt and then came back. Because he'd already been dressed, I guarantee, when that alert came through. I lost it. And I don't look great in this story, because my husband is a good man and I'm not making fun of him at all. But I lost it, because it felt like every burden just in that moment just crushed me over a stupid red shirt that he was wearing and the kid wasn't. She never got in the red shirt, by the way. We fought way too long. She just went to school happily in her uniform and didn't even notice the difference, right? Because I think other parents also didn't send their kids in red shirts because it was stupid. But we're burdened. We're burdened. And we carry those burdens in weird ways. And for Martha, this burden of serving, of feeling alone, of feeling isolated, it didn't come out sideways to her husband in a red shirt. It came out sideways to Jesus. Of all people, right? Martha walks up to Jesus, and God love her. This is why she's my favorite woman in all of sacred scripture. She looks at him, and I can only imagine how sassy it was. Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me by myself to do the serving? Let's break that sentence down. She thinks Jesus doesn't care about her. And she feels alone, by myself, to do all this stuff. How many among us have sat in the church, have shown up to the meeting, have planned the thing, have done the work, and we feel like the Lord does not care and nobody else does either because we are by ourselves doing the serving? And I'm sorry, y'all, but evangelization doesn't work. It doesn't work if you and I feel like we're doing it by ourselves and that Jesus doesn't care. Those talks might be fine, and those events might be really well organized, and those books got bought, and everybody took one home. And yay, Jesus can do anything with anything, but golly, it's not working for you. If all you feel like you have to say to the Lord is, do you not care that you left me by myself to do the serving? That's how she felt. In that moment, everybody wants to judge Martha for whining. Everybody wants to criticize Martha for making herself a busybody, because we don't see ourselves in that moment as someone who feels like Jesus has not seen us, who feels far from the love of God, which is literally the thing that animates us to vigorously share the gospel. So you can't vigorously and joyfully and passionately and share the gospel well if you don't know the love of God. And Martha knows that she's far from it because she goes to him. And Jesus looks at her, and with a tender compassion, he was telling a story about pigs falling off a hill one second, and then he sees this woman have this breakdown, and he looks at her, and he says her name. And he says her name twice. And I'm no scripture scholar, but I do remember from my biblical studies class in undergrad, and from Bible in a Year, that when Jesus says somebody's name, he's calling attention. He either changes somebody's name, new identity, or he calls somebody's name, he's like, look at me. He casts out demons by name. Names give him authority. And he looks at Martha, and he says her name twice. Martha, Martha, look at me. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. He doesn't look at her and say, you're not alone. He doesn't look at her and say, I need a refill. He doesn't look at her and say, the food was great. He looks at her and he says, you are anxious and you are worried. He sees it. He sees her. And then he invites her. There's need of only one thing. And then he points to her sister and he says, she's chosen the better part. And that won't be taken from her. Jesus prioritizes things. We like to convince ourselves that it's all good, but Jesus prioritizes something in this moment. He tells Martha, you're anxious and you're worried, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you feel alone. I'm sorry that this is a burden that you're carrying seemingly on your own. I love you in your anxiety and worry about this, but I want to draw your attention to this thing over here, which is the being still, which is the resting with me. It's okay when Jesus says something is better than something else. We try to convince ourselves that it's all even, but Jesus is prioritizing sitting with him over the active doing of the very good thing. If we can't get it through our heads as a church that the priority is that we are people who sit with Jesus, then we're going to keep consolidating parishes. Then we're going to see this next generation want nothing to do with this old, outdated, bigoted church. Because what they see are a bunch of people who talk a big game. What folks see are a bunch of Catholics who say, like, yeah, I love my Catholic faith, but then the priorities that we give to our Catholic faith are not actual prayer, are not actual living a life of faith visible to the world. It's just a bunch of doing. It's just a bunch of busybody Catholicism. And I'm sorry, the Lord does not give us vigor. The Lord does not give us the obligation to be mere busybodies in the church. He gives us vigor and obligation to literally share God's love. And last time I checked, you cannot share something you do not know. Last time I checked, you cannot talk about Jesus with any sort of authority unless you actually have spent time talking to him, or better yet, shutting up and letting him talk to you. Jesus Christ did not come into this world just so that we could claim a really perfect parish website and a lot of podcast downloads and a ton of people participating in external programs. He came into this world to show us that the tomb is empty and that we are invited into this new life. And we can only experience that new life, we can only understand that very basic gospel proclamation that God loves me so much that he sent his only son to die for me, to rise for me, to invite me into communion and relationship with him. That's not something that you can learn here. You can say it from here, but it's something that takes root right here. And it's only going to take root right there if you actually sit down and allow the Lord to till the soil of your heart and be with him. That's why the day started with Mass. That's why we're going to give you some time to talk among your table, and I'm not going to ask you to outline the best programs that your parishes have done in the past few years or strategies for ways to engage people in conversation. We'll talk about some of those particulars this afternoon. Right now, the question I want you to answer, and you're sitting with people that you came with, right? Are you not? If you're sitting with perfect strangers, even better. But if you're sitting with people that you work with in your parish, this might be a little challenging for you, but I want you to lean into it. I want you to have an active conversation about your prayer life. If you had to gauge your relationship with Jesus right now by where you would sit in a church, you're super, super close to Jesus, you're right in the front, or you feel a little distant, so you're hiding in the back, like most Catholics tend to do. You're somewhere in the middle, you're like scooched into the middle part of the church, but you're still sitting on the aisle, like you want to be able to get up quickly. You don't want to be crammed in by those annoying families with those loud kids, right? We've all been there. I just want you to tell your table, tell these people that you're spending this time with, where are you right now in your relationship with Jesus? Where are you right now in your prayer? What does your prayer look like? Do you actually have a routine for prayer? Or is it like this afterthought? Did you come to this event just slightly late so you would miss Mass because I'm going to go tomorrow? And when we all do it, have a conversation actively about prayer, where you are in your prayer life, where you are in relationship with Jesus. And then the kind of the follow-up question to that is, if your prayer life was better, and it could always be better, if your prayer life was better, what difference do you think that could make in your ministry? And that's going to be a different answer for every person. I know it's kind of an abstract question. We're all adults. We're all big kids. We can do this. If you're not a super chatty person, if you're a little more introverted, no one's going to force you. If you're somebody who tends to dominate the conversation, maybe kind of lean off a little bit, see if other people want to share. But this is an opportunity and a chance to really engage with one another in a meaningful way. For the record, Martha does sit down with Jesus. And we know that something happens in her heart because of what happens when her brother Lazarus is raised from the dead. That Mary is hiding in the house, sad, and she's every right to be. And Martha greets Jesus and says, if you'd been here, this wouldn't have happened. And the only way that she would have known that power of Jesus, the only way that she would have known that Jesus could do something about that was because she actually knew him. Not just because she did a bunch of stuff for him. Not just because she cooked him a meal. Not just because she organized the party. But because she sat down and she listened to him. And she probably told him what was on her heart.